Hey everyone, we're in the middle of a series called Big Picture, and in it we've been talking about the life of this pretty important guy in the Bible named Joseph. Now, we'll get to him a little bit later on, but what you need to know is this. His story is crazy. He found himself in the middle of some pretty unbelievable, difficult, and even scary circumstances, and while we all get the privilege of knowing how amazing Joseph's story ended up, at the time, he certainly didn't see the bigger picture. All he could see was happening in front of him right then and there. Now I have to wonder if being in the middle of all those crazy and painful circumstances made Joseph ask the question that I think a lot of us have asked when we find ourselves in a similar situations. What's the point? I mean, honestly, haven't we all been there? You go through a situation in your life that you don't understand, or find yourself in a circumstance you don't want to be in, or you're disappointed with the way your life looks and you think, what's the point of all of this? Why do I have to go through this? Why does it have to be this way? I know I've been there. I mean, my entire life I've always been a very organized, put together individual. I like things in their place. But for some reason, making my bed has never been something that I'm entirely interested in. Ever since I was a kid, I always looked at it this way. I'm going to get back in bed in a few hours. Why do I need to make my bed? Maybe you haven't had an experience exactly like mine, but a lot of you have probably felt this way too. Maybe for you it was at school. You've thought, why do I need to learn about things like the French Revolution, or the periodic table of elements, or long division? When am I ever going to need this in my life? What's the point? Or maybe you felt this way at home. Your parents make you do chores, or they make you play with your siblings, or they wake you up early on Saturday mornings, and you absolutely don't understand why. Every time you're picking up your clothes off the floor, or taking your baby sister outside, or being forced to get up early on a weekend, you think, what's the point? Maybe you've asked that question when you found yourself dealing with a disappointment. Maybe when you didn't make the team, or got ghosted by a friend, or got gossiped about at school. You just couldn't understand why you had to deal with the pain and disappointment of it. You couldn't see the bigger picture, the point of that situation. Or maybe it was something really and truly painful. Maybe you've watched a loved one struggle through an illness. Maybe they even passed away. Or maybe you've dealt with things like anxiety or depression, and no matter what you do, you can't seem to shake it. Maybe your parents are going through a divorce, or you've been placed in foster care, or someone close to you hurt you in a way you don't know how to come back from. Those things certainly make us wonder, what's the point of all of this? Maybe you even feel this way about your faith. You come to church, you crack open the Bible from time to time, you say a few prayers here and there, but nothing really feels different. You keep trying to connect with God, but nothing seems to happen. And so you're left wondering, what's the point? Truth is, we'll all experience difficult things throughout our lives, and when we're in the middle of those difficult things, we often ask that same question. What's the point? We don't see any good in this situation, or we don't experience the outcome we hope for. And we don't see any part of the big picture. We just see our pain. When we feel that way, it's nearly impossible to believe that anything good could come from it. Right? That brings us right back to our pal Joseph. His life is recorded in a portion of the Bible called the Old Testament, the first half of the Bible written before Jesus came to earth. Remember how we said Joseph found himself in the middle of a lot of difficult and painful and frustrating circumstances? If you don't recall, or if you haven't been able to catch up on any of these videos yet, this is the fourth lesson, so you can go back and take a look at our Facebook page. We have lesson 1, 2, 3, and 4 there. We're going to get into a new topic tonight. Some of the items he had to deal with, his brothers threw him in a well. Joseph was sold into slavery. He was taken to Egypt to work for a guy named Potiphar. And just as things were starting to look up for Joseph, he was put in a difficult situation, falsely accused of something he did not do, and thrown into prison as punishment. Talk about unfair. Can you imagine how Joseph must have felt sitting there in prison? I know what I'd be thinking. I'd be thinking something like, God, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, could things get any worse for me? How long is this terrible time going to last? What's the point of all of this? Now, I think these are definitely fair questions for Joseph to have asked. He tried so hard to do the right thing and remain faithful to God, and this was where it got him. Prison. If I were Joseph, I'd definitely have a hard time seeing the bigger picture. But thankfully, God always has the bigger picture in mind. What Joseph couldn't see as he sat in prison was that God was working behind the scenes to help him. He was working for good. Even during Joseph's pain, Joseph just couldn't see it. You know, I take our current circumstance right now with the COVID-19, the pandemic that's going around, and understanding the regulations that are sitting in front of us. We don't see the bigger picture. We don't see everything that God is molding around us while we're doing what we have to do. And while I've told the youth group kids that I meet with as regularly as I can, I miss the communication back and forth in our classes. I'm usually very much involved with the back and forth. I'll ask questions and get answers, and this is a very different style of teaching for me. I don't see the bigger picture, but I know that God has a plan. He has a purpose for all of this. You see, getting back to Joseph, he was in prison, but he wasn't alone. Two important guys in Pharaoh's household, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, both got thrown in there with Joseph for a little while. You can probably guess the role of the baker in Pharaoh's household, but a cupbearer? That's not a role we hear of often in our current day. Basically, Pharaoh's cupbearer was the trusted person who served him drinks and made sure it wasn't poisoned. In short, he was the guy that if he didn't die while testing Pharaoh's food, Pharaoh would eat. I don't know where you sign up for that job, but I hope it comes with hazard pay. Now back to our story. What Joseph didn't know yet was that these two guys, Pharaoh's cupbearer and his baker, were going to play a much bigger role in Joseph's story. We're going to take a look at Genesis 40, verses 5 through 8 in the New Living Testament, New Living Translation. While they were in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they were both looked upset. "Why do you look so worried today?" he asked them. And they replied, "We both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean." At first glance, this doesn't seem all that remarkable of a story. Two guys had a couple of weird dreams. It's not that important, right? You'd be wrong. You see, at that time, dreams were believed to be predictions of what might actually happen in the future. So often when people had weird dreams, they would seek out someone to help them figure out the meaning so they could understand what was to come in the future. And Joseph knew that God could help him interpret dreams. So he told the cupbearer and the baker just that. Then Joseph listened to their dreams and interpreted them as God showed him what they meant. Joseph told the cupbearer that his dream meant that Pharaoh was going to restore him to his position in 3 days. Yay, cupbearer! Great news. Then Joseph predicted that the baker's dream meant that in 3 days, the same 3 days, great news, you're getting out of here, but the bad news is you're going to die. That's not great news. So great news for both of you. You get out of prison in 3 days. You're going to live and you're going to die. It's a bit of a bummer. I'd much rather be the cupbearer in that scenario. Either way, after Joseph helped these two guys understand their dreams, he had just one simple request for the cupbearer. "Sorry, baker, I'm not going to ask you for much because you're not going to be around to help me out." But he talked to the cupbearer and he said, "When you get restored to your position with Pharaoh, just mention me. Let Pharaoh know what I've done." In Genesis 40, verses 20 through 23, it says, "Pharaoh's birthday came 3 days later, and he prepared a banquet for all his officials and staff. He summoned his chief cupbearer and his chief baker from prison to join the officials. He then restored the chief cupbearer to his former position so he could again hand Pharaoh his cup. But Pharaoh impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had predicted when he interpreted his dream. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. Okay, I think there are two things important to note about this passage. First, everything God told Joseph would happen did happen. Sorry, baker, not your day. Second, after all of that, Joseph was still forgotten. The cupbearer didn't even keep his word. And so Joseph remained in prison. Can you imagine how hopeless Joseph must have felt after that? He probably thought that that was his last chance to be released from prison. You can only assume that again, he found himself asking, what's the point of all this pain and suffering? Nothing is ever going to change. And for a while, that probably seemed true because, as the Bible tells us, it took a full 2 years for the cupbearer to finally remember Joseph. But Joseph didn't know all that was happening, all that God was doing in those years. He couldn't see the big picture. Can you really blame Joseph for probably feeling down about his situation? Can you blame him for not paying attention to the bigger picture that God was creating? He was in prison for 2 extra years. That's an incredibly long time to be wondering what God was up to. Think about it this way. Does anyone remember Mbop? And maybe who actually sang that song? I do. It was Hanson. I was in junior high when it came out, and all the girls loved it. I didn't really care, but hey, I remember the song. When it came out, everyone was crazy about it. Crazy about the band. But now, so much time has passed, no one even thinks it's cool anymore. Sorry for those of you that were raised in the 80s and 90s. I apologize if I've offended you with my statements. But those of you that are younger, you might not entirely know some of these older songs. 2 whole years have gone by. Can you imagine being in prison that long, feeling alone and forgotten? Well, that was the situation Joseph was in. But 2 years later, the Pharaoh himself had a dream that no one could interpret. It was then that the cupbearer was like, oh, I remember this guy in prison 2 years ago. He interpreted my own dream. And just like that, things turned around for Joseph. And he got his chance. Pharaoh called on him to interpret his own dream. And God helped Joseph do just that. Take a look at what it says here in Genesis chapter 41, verses 39 through 40. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours. Finally, after all the struggle and suffering, after slavery and imprisonment and abandonment, Joseph finally got the good news that seemed like it would change his life for the better. It was about time, right? But here's the thing. This isn't about Joseph finally getting good news. This isn't about the happy ending or nice promotion Joseph got. It's about the bigger picture. What Joseph didn't realize during that time in prison was that God was writing the bigger story. Joseph didn't see then that right there in the middle of the painful and difficult circumstances, Joseph, was positioned to do something great. Something only Joseph could do. Joseph's story was painful, filled with problems. But through those problems, God was creating a better future for Joseph. Joseph just had to be willing to trust that God could use him right where he was. Even during Joseph's pain and problems, God was working behind the scenes for his good. And I think the same can be true for you. we may never understand why we're dealing with the things we're dealing with or why we're facing our circumstances, but we can trust, just like there was for Joseph, there is a bigger picture for us. And while creating our bigger picture, God is working on our good. That good may not always look the way we think it will. It certainly didn't for Joseph, and we may never actually figure out why we had to go through the tough times that we went through. But when we trust God right where we are, we can trust that He is working toward what's best for us, even if we can't see it or don't understand it. In other words, when you can't see the bigger picture, trust that God is working for your good. When you can't see the bigger picture, trust that God is working for your good. So how do we do that? Instead of struggling to find the point in our pain, how do we trust that God is working for our good? I think we can start with a few steps. First, you need to exercise faith. On a daily basis, sometimes maybe even hourly, choose to believe and trust that God is good and that He has everything in His control. In those moments when you don't feel like you believe or when the pain is just too much, say something like this over and over until you start to believe it. God, You are good no matter what. And You have everything in Your control. The second thing you can do is look for the good. While you're in your difficult situation, it's normal to want to rush past the problem. But sometimes when you pause and take a step back, you can learn something about yourself and others. Sometimes you can grow in the process. And while you won't always see the way in which God is working for your good, you can still make a choice to look for it. And you can look back on the times when God worked for your good in the past, even when you didn't realize it at the time. The third thing you can do is you can seek encouragement. When you lose sight of the truth that God is working for your good, lean into someone else. Ask them to tell you a story of when God was working for their good, even when they couldn't see the bigger picture. Use their experience to encourage you during difficult times. I can tell you, I've got plenty of times that God has touched my life, and I didn't know what He was doing until maybe years later. I didn't see it until way later. So in closing today, I want you guys to remember, when you can't see the bigger picture, trust that God is working for your good. Because He is. I want to close on this final question for you guys to contemplate. What's one situation in my life right now that I don't understand the point of? What's one situation in my life right now that I don't understand the point of?